you know, open a rift, which summons some meteors, and so to escape the meteors, they have to enter this otherworldly realm called the Medium, and there's this ancient battle that's going on, and they meet this other group. Actually, you should just read it, but you should also maybe clear your calendar, because Homestuck is long. Very long. 5,000 pages long. 5,000 pages long, and it's not even done yet. And just as a quick aside, I'm not current on Homestuck yet, though I'm getting close, so no spoilers in the comments. I'm serious. None. I will flag you as spam. A mammoth story told in the style of a text adventure using still images, animated GIFs, and chat logs, Homestuck also occasionally requires its readers to watch Flash animations, play Flash games, and read huge walls of text. This makes it a really novel storytelling vehicle, but because of these things, it can also be a little bit of a chore to get through, which isn't too uncommon. I mean, Homestuck isn't the only difficult piece of literature with a huge cult following, right? I mean, I have friends who have made their own infographics in an attempt to keep track of the over 400 characters in Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, and if you went to an art school, you probably suffered through all of the not tennis parts of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. These tomes, though great, are but delightful heraldry on the path towards the mecca of labyrinthine lit. James Joyce's Ulysses. Considered one of, if not the greatest English language novel ever written, Ulysses is a knot of syntactic rigmarole. It is about one man, Leopold Bloom, on one day, June 16th, 1904, and it is 265,000 words long, with a lexicon of over 30,000 words. And it is a challenge. For example, a vowel, sonnet, I could, rebound of garter, not leave thee, smack, la cloche, thigh smack, a vowel, warm, sweetheart, goodbye. In one sense, Ulysses is about one dude in his home city of Dublin. There's a carriage ride, a funeral, a dinner, some random wandering. In another sense, it's also kind of about itself and its circuitous construction, its constant allusions to Homer's The Odyssey, and Joyce's insane linguistic gymnastics. In a way, it might be because of its challenging bizarritude, not in spite of it, that people who've read Ulysses, who are kind of like unicorns, but instead of horns, they have degrees in the arts, really enjoy it. There's this weird, rare joy in getting through Ulysses and figuring it out, in wading through the details and all of the nonsense prose, in looking a word up in the dictionary every 10 minutes only to find out that it's not in there because Joyce invented it. Jerk. At the finish line, however, though parts may have been unpleasant, you really feel as though you've accomplished something. This is called effort justification. In essence, the more difficult an experience you inflict upon yourself, the more likely you are to think it is totally worth it once it's done. It's a bit of cognitively dissonant psychology which explains why people love organizations which haze them, or are enamored with their terrible tattoos, or go see The Expendables 2.
Trap him, find him, kill him.
It kind of means if you have a bad time, you're gonna have a great time. Of course, there is a law of diminishing returns. If something is a huge challenge but also totally sucks, then all bets are off. And that is a balance that's really hard to strike. It's why Joyce can throw thoughts on a page the way Pollock throws paint on a canvas. And why Hussey can up and kill every single one of your favorite characters. And what do? We stick around, because the challenge makes the awesome stuff that much awesomer. Of course, not everyone agrees. Its difficulty might be why the modern library lists Ulysses as the greatest English language novel, while The Guardian describes it as a book which is more discussed than read. And its flagrant disregard for its players, readers, might be why I've heard so many lamentations from friends who just aren't able to continue Homestuck. But this doesn't change the fact that Andrew Hussey has undertaken a creation of unrivaled proportions on the internet, the very source of our, quote, shrinking attention spans. He successfully challenged the very common assumption that internet audiences don't want a challenge and won't stick around if one arises. And while for some that might be true, there are still plenty more who are willing to put up with all of the time shenanigans that Hussey can summon. And why? Because it's worth it. What do you guys think? Are you more likely to enjoy a piece of media that presents a larger challenge? Let us know in the comments. And if you're not too busy futzing with your fetch modus, subscribe. We predicted that you guys would have some really smart things to say about William Gibson, and you didn't disappoint. Let's see what you had to say. First and foremost, to Mr. Monfrey's class, awesome questions. Yes, Ray Bradbury, genius. Love him. Hoverboards, I'm not so sure. Seems like we're not going to get there by the time that Back to the Future said we would, but we did just get hover bikes, so we'll put a link to that in the description. Those seem pretty cool. Time machine, I think, probably a little bit further off. As far as the doctor selling sonic screwdrivers, questionable, but if he did have a corner shop, I would definitely go there. And please make sure that you thank your awesome teacher, Mr. Monfries, for letting you watch the show. And keep asking questions. We will keep answering them. There was also an awesome take on some of the ideas in this episode on IO9, so we'll put a link to that discussion in the description as well. You should check it out. Joshua McGee, I don't understand this comment. It's just an arrangement of random words that make no sense. Jinsu2301 points out that a lot of Nostradamus' predictions were based on celestial patterns, that in effect they're not really random. In response to that, I think that you should go and check out this thing called bibliomancy, which was one of Nostradamus' favorite techniques. Obfelixy and a bunch of other people pointed out that William Gibson and his cohort might not be predicting the future, but might be inspiring it, and that the cause and effect relationship might be totally reversed, which is really interesting and totally valid. I would love to hear what those guys have to say about that. William Gibson, if you're watching, send us an email. Look at the Ceiling makes a really interesting point that the availability and ease of use of technology is actually making it easier to predict what happens next, which totally makes sense. I totally buy that. Me too! She was carving her initials in the side of the moose with an interspace toothbrush given to her by her brother-in-law, Svenge. Wait, do you know Svenge? Here's an idea. William Gibson is a modern-day oracle. If you've never read a William Gibson novel, first, what? Really? Are you sure you're watching the right channel? And second, they're really very good. William Gibson is a sci-fi writer of incredible renown, awesomeness, and, as it turns out, soothability. In Neuromancer, he predicted the internet, and in Burning Chrome, he coined the word cyberspace. In Idoru, he predicted Miku Hatsune, and in Virtual Light, the coming popularity of reality television. But William Gibson is, in essence, just an entertainer. He's not an oracle. I mean, Apollo doesn't speak through him. We don't pick up the newest Gibson novel and think, OMG, I hope he says we're gonna have flying cars next year because having a flying car would be so sweet. Come to think of it, we don't really treat anybody like that anymore, as a kind of earnest-to-gird fortune-teller. Sure, we still read horoscopes, but we've kind of moved past fearing the end times or wanting predictions for the coming harvest. The vague superstition we all sometimes engage in is a kind of cultural residue from the time when we were all really interested in casting bones and omens and stuff. Back in those days, the world was incredibly difficult to understand. There was no Google to answer questions like, why does it rain? Why is the sky blue? Or, how does Zac Efron get his hair to look like that? And so the oracle provided a kind of utility. Even if they said you were going to have a bad time, at least you knew it was coming, which actually happened kind of a lot. The oracle at Delphi, said to have direct communication with Apollo, let the Athenians know that they were going to be torn limb from limb by the Spartans, and that later, Nero's time as Emperor of Rome was short at best. Nostradamus was essentially a 16th century French-Italian inverse of Tony Robbins with a penchant for plagiarism, predicted plagues, floods, apocalyptic earthquakes, and even the coming of the Antichrist. And of course, Mayans. Their story's a little complicated, so we're going to save them for another day. So in their place, please enjoy this picture of John Cusack. But anyway, the reputations of these predictors aren't exactly stellar. Astrology joke! You see, it's funny because stellar is an astrology thing it means that, never mind. Some careful reading reveals that a lot of the correct predictions are really just the result of clever or purposefully unclear wordplay. And Nostradamus wrote hundreds of predictions, ranging in effect from one person to the entire world. He was playing the odds, but was mostly bad at playing them. By comparison, modern sci-fi writers have a much higher batting soothsaying average. For all the works penned by William Gibson, Werner Vinge, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, Neil Stephenson, Orson Scott Card, Arthur C. Clarke, and the list goes on, there seems to be a larger number of correct predictions than from the group of people who in the past actually called themselves oracles. Virtual reality, augmented reality, a jam-packed media ecosystem, nature in retreat from human growth, it's all kind of there. And why might that be? Why such a high success rate? Sci-fi writers take on the deceptively complicated task of imagining a future which is connected to the present. Old-school future lookers, especially if you take into account some of Nostradamus' more creative techniques, spent a lot of time trying to pick future stuff out of thin air. When they were right, a lot of the time they were lucky, or sufficiently vague, or both. Kind of like fortune cookies. They were, in essence, starting at the present and imagining a future without consideration for the intervening space, from point A to point C. William Gibson, as a matter of comparison, has a particularly good knack for imagining a near future and then building a far future based on it, from point A to point C by way of B. Which is not only why his book's great and interesting, but why he's someone we should probably listen to.
He sort of predicted Soba and Acta too.
So, but who cares that William Gibson has predicted some things a couple times? The need for sage-like characters has basically disappeared. Way back when, things like hurricanes and earthquakes and disease were mystical events with very real consequences on your family and society and the planet. Not knowing their cause or source made them essentially magic, and so we needed the Oracle to help us understand them. Well, quote finger understand, not science understand. Today, most of us aren't responsible for the harvest, and we understand where hurricanes and tsunamis come from. But this doesn't mean there aren't still some things about the world that are incredibly hard to understand. Arthur C. Clarke's third law is, famously, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If you showed your iPhone to someone from the 19th century, they would probably burn you as a witch.
We have found the witch! May we burn her?
Dare I say it is essentially magic. The cultural and societal implications of all of these mysterious technological boxes is hard, if not impossible, for us to imagine until it's already happened. It's good in that case to have Mr. Gibson and his pals around to help us steer the ship and understand not only the future, but also the present. What do you guys think? What sci-fi predictions are right around the corner? Let us know in the comments. And Nostradamus actually predicted that you would subscribe, which means you probably won't. YouTube comments about YouTube comments about YouTube comments. Let's see what you guys had to say about the cultural singularity. First of all, there were some really great conversations on Reddit's Explain Like I'm 5 subreddit and on richarddawkins.net, so we'll put some links in the description so you can check those out. Driftmast and a bunch of other people point out that internet culture might actually be made for something called the attention economy, things like upvotes and karma and lols and whatever, which is very true and very real. The attention economy is very interesting. We have a definitive answer, something that describes something that is Nick Cage-esque. It's Cajun. James Carvell would approve. Sky Swordsman points out that one of the integral parts of the cultural singularity is the speed at which all of this stuff can be produced, which is very important, especially if you're making the comparison to movies, which take forever. Insert reference to insertion of witty response. Jadder makes a really interesting comparison between the cultural singularity and bacteria culture. He breaks the metaphor a little bit, but we forgive him. It's really interesting. Datsweeper makes a point about something called the meme half-life, which is the amount of time that a piece of internet culture stays popular and how that could lead to the homogenization of overall internet culture. I promise you, king among nerds, I will be fine. Going bald is awesome. You don't have to get haircuts as often. Haircuts are cheaper, and I don't have to worry about what my hair does. It just kind of does this. Huh. Thanks for the recommendation, TrexLord1. I'll check it out. Here's an idea. Internet culture has brought about the singularity. Recently, we've been able to witness two major cultural events, the 2012 Olympics and the landing of the Curiosity on Mars. And aside from being totally awesome and killer, these cultural events have caused the generation of tons and tons more culture. Some of it is even more entertaining and in certain cases easier to view than the original events themselves. I mean, I saw more rhythmic gymnastics in animated GIF form than I did in broadcast. And all this culture has been seen by possibly millions of people. But there's one detail about all the Michaela or Mohawk guy or any other meme you're looking at, actually, that unlike the Olympics or the Mars landing, you probably don't know. And that is where they came from. They just poof, appear on Reddit or Tumblr, no compensation expected, no context provided, and no motivation except for what's self-evident. The vast, vast majority of people, and here I'm talking about CNN or your mom, they don't know who, how, or why internet memes are made. Now, and this is the weird part, in the absence of these factoids, isn't the appearance of internet culture in effect an automated process? Because if it is, then, oh boy, you got yourself a singularity. There are actually a bunch of singularities, but the one that people are the most familiar with is the technological singularity. Sci-fi writer Werner Vinge coined it to describe a time at which technology could essentially create better versions of itself. Central to the singularity is the idea of artificial intelligence. Basically, computers and software decide to build better computers and software, which decide to build better computers and software, and so on and so on and so on, until we have to send Arnold Schwarzenegger back in time to protect John Connor. It's like a whole thing. And because humans aren't involved in that improvement, it makes us Well, actually, we don't know. Infinitely self-generating technology could bring about any number of things. World peace, a post-scarcity economy, a government run by vacuum cleaners. Who knows? Post-singularity is a time when, because the intellect required to conceive of it is so beyond our own, we can't really be sure what happens. Now, I'm not saying that internet culture is going to bring about world peace or a future where Will Smith has to save us from the vacuum uprising. What I am saying, though, is that many of internet culture's features really look a lot like the singularity. Like a kind of cultural singularity. Using the technological singularity as a model, the cultural singularity would be a point at which where culture is able to create more, better culture automagically. In a post-cultural singularity world, culture will become increasingly varied and self-referential, not to mention more complex in both its construction and execution. It would show up and improve at a constantly